Mary was the kind of person who went unnoticed, but whose work was never overlooked. At 60 years old, her calloused hands and wrinkles told the story of a life dedicated to hard work. After decades serving different families, she had learned to be discreet and efficient, indispensable qualities in domestic service. She had lived alone since her husband's death a decade earlier. Her grown children had moved far away, and her job as a housekeeper was not only her source of income, but also her way of filling her days. "Staying busy is what keeps me alive," she often said to her friends from the church she attended. When she got the job at the Belmont Mansion, she saw an opportunity for financial stability, something increasingly rare with her advancing age. The ad called for discretion and experience, and she had plenty of both. "I know I can trust you, Mary," Mrs. Belmont said during the interview, adjusting the pearls on her neck. The mansion, however, wasn't like other places she had worked. Despite its impressive size and impeccable decor, there was something gloomy about the place. Her new employers, Mr. and Mrs. Belmont, were polite but distant. Mary knew better than to pry, but she noticed the unusual rules of the house right away. The most peculiar rule was about the attic. "You may go through all the floors, but never go up to the attic. There is nothing there that concerns you," Mrs. Belmont warned, her tone cold, almost rehearsed. Mary didn't ask why. Her job was simple: keep everything in order and don't ask questions. She thought it would be easy, but something about the house kept her on edge. It was as if every step echoed louder than it should, and every shadow concealed a watchful eye. While arranging the laundry one stormy night, the rain poured endlessly, tapping against the tall windows of the Belmont Mansion. After folding the last sheets, Mary tried to ignore the deafening sound of thunder. She felt more tired than usual, but decided to sweep the kitchen before calling it a day. As she cleaned, something caught her attention, a faint, almost imperceptible sound from upstairs. She stopped for a moment, gripping the broom. It must be the wind coming through a window, she thought. But the sound came again, clearer this time. It was the sound of soft footsteps, as if someone were trying not to be heard. Mary's heart raced. The mansion was empty. Mr. and Mrs. Belmont had gone out for a business dinner, leaving her entirely alone. She dropped the broom and carefully picked up the lantern she kept in the kitchen. "Is anyone there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. No response, just the sound of rain and occasionally a creak from upstairs. With the lantern in hand, Mary climbed the stairs slowly. Each step seemed taller than normal, and the heavy atmosphere made her heart pound in her chest. When she reached the main hallway, her eyes stopped at the attic door. It was ajar. It was the first time Mary had seen it like that. Since her first day, that door had remained locked, almost as if it held something precious or dangerous. Approaching cautiously, she noticed the footsteps had stopped, replaced by a faint sobbing. A muffled cry, almost like that of a child. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice now trembling. She gently pushed the door open, revealing a steep staircase that led into the attic's darkness. Curiosity and concern battled within her. Mrs. Belmont's words echoed in her mind. "There is nothing there that concerns you." But the sound of crying continued, and Mary knew she couldn't ignore it. She climbed the stairs with hesitant steps, the lantern gradually illuminating the dusty space. Old boxes, furniture covered with white sheets, and a movement in the corner. Who's there? Come out. I won't hurt you," she said, trying to sound calm. From behind a pile of boxes, a small, thin figure emerged. A girl, her wide eyes, pale face, and disheveled hair falling over her shoulders made her look like a ghostly vision. "Please don't tell them," the girl whispered, her voice heavy with fear. Mary stood frozen, the lantern trembling in her hands as she stared at the girl. She couldn't have been older than 12, but there was something about her face, the tired look, the frightened expression, that made her seem older than her years. "Please don't tell them," the girl repeated, curling further behind the boxes. Mary took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I won't tell anyone. But who are you? What are you doing up here?" The girl hesitated, as if deciding whether she could trust her. After a moment of silence, she whispered, "My name is Clara. They keep me here. I can't leave." The simple words carried a weight that sent chills through Mary. She knelt to be at the girl's level and lowered the lantern to better illuminate her face. Clara was visibly malnourished. Her pale skin, sunken eyes, and dirty, tattered clothes told a story of neglect. "Do you live here? Are they your family?" Mary asked, trying to piece things together. Clara nodded slightly. "Yes, but they don't want me here. They only let me stay because they can't send me away." "Send you away? What do you mean?" Mary's mind swirled with possibilities. None of it made sense. "My mother died, and he's my father," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. Mary's eyes widened. "He? Who's your father?" "Mr. Belmont," Clara replied, her eyes filling with tears. The revelation struck Mary like lightning. Mr. Belmont, the wealthy and influential patriarch who seemed to live for appearances, had a daughter he kept locked in the attic? It was unthinkable. Why would he do this? "Why are you hidden away up here?" Clara looked down, unable to meet Mary's gaze. "My mother, she worked here like you. When she got pregnant with me, he said he'd take care of us, but he lied. After she died, they locked me up here. They said I'm a problem. A mistake." Mary felt a lump form in her throat. The coldness and indifference of this family, so obsessed with appearances, were worse than she had imagined. "You are not a mistake, dear," Mary said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I promise. I'll get you out of here." Clara gripped Mary's hand tightly. "No. If you try, they'll hurt you. They're not afraid to do bad things. They've done it before." Mary realized Clara wasn't just scared. She lived in constant fear, shaped by years of abuse and threats. The promise to help her seemed riskier than she had anticipated. But Mary knew in her heart she couldn't ignore what she had just discovered. She stood up, holding Clara's hand. "Stay here, dear. I'll think of something. But I won't leave you like this. I promise." Clara hesitated but nodded. Mary descended the attic stairs slowly, her heart heavy as a stone. Each step felt like a greater burden as Clara's revelations echoed in her mind. Mr. Belmont's illegitimate daughter, locked away and hidden as a shameful secret. Back in the kitchen, Mary leaned against the counter, trying to organize her thoughts. She knew she had to help Clara, but how? The Belmonts were powerful and influential, and Mary had nothing but her honesty and courage to confront them. "I should call the police, but will they believe me?" she murmured to herself. She had heard stories of simple people who had challenged the rich and powerful, only to be silenced or discredited. As she pondered, the sound of firm footsteps at the front entrance startled her. It was Mr. and Mrs. Belmont, returning from their dinner. Mary quickly straightened up, trying to look busy. "Good evening, Mary," said Mrs. Belmont, her usual tone of superiority evident. "I trust everything is in order." "Yes, ma'am. Everything as usual," Mary replied, keeping her voice steady to hide what she had just discovered. Mr. Belmont entered shortly after, adjusting his jacket. His eyes met Mary's for a brief moment, and she felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the first time he had made her uncomfortable, but now, knowing what she knew, it felt as though every move he made concealed something sinister. "Good evening, Mary," he said curtly before disappearing upstairs. Mary knew she couldn't confront them directly, not at that moment. She had to be careful. Sitting on her bed that night, she began to devise a plan. She couldn't risk Clara's safety, or her own, but she also couldn't stand by while a child lived as a prisoner. "I need to find someone who can help. Someone who will believe me," she thought. Her mind turned to Sister Margareth, a nun from the local church whom Mary had known for years. Margareth was a kind woman with connections and influence in the community. Perhaps she could help without putting Clara in immediate danger. However, before acting, Mary knew she needed to gather more information. She was aware the Belmonts were dangerous, but didn't yet know the full extent of what they might do to protect their secret. In the days that followed, Mary began observing every detail of the Belmonts' routines, searching for clues to better understand the situation. She noticed patterns. Mr. Belmont went to the attic only once a week, always at night, with a serious expression. Mrs. Belmont, on the other hand, seemed to avoid any mention of the space, but was excessively attentive to the mansion's doors, as if afraid something, or someone, might escape. They won't admit anything if I ask directly, Mary thought as she tidied the library. She knew she needed evidence before taking any action. An unexpected opportunity arose when, while cleaning Mr. Belmont's office, she found a folder left on the desk. Inside were papers that appeared insignificant, but one particular document caught her eye. It was an old, worn birth certificate with the name Clara Belmont listed in the child field. The mother was recorded as Eloise Martins, a name Mary recognized from old stories about the mansion. "So, it's true," she murmured, carefully folding the paper and returning it to its place. Clara was indeed Mr. Belmont's illegitimate daughter, and it seemed her mother had once worked in the house. Later that day, Mary decided to test Mrs. Belmont's patience. While serving afternoon tea, she casually remarked, "This house is so big. I imagine it's seen many stories." Mrs. Belmont, who usually paid little attention to Mary, looked up with a faint furrow of her brow. "Stories? What kind of stories, Mary?" "Oh, nothing much. I just thought I heard something in the attic the other day. Like a child crying," Mary said, keeping her tone neutral. Mrs. Belmont's face hardened. She set her teacup down with enough force for the sound to echo through the room. "There are no children in this house, Mary, and we've already made it clear that the attic is not a place for the staff. I hope you understand that," she said, her voice icy. Mary quickly nodded, feigning submission, but internally, she knew she had struck a nerve. Mrs. Belmont's reaction confirmed that something was terribly wrong in that house. That evening, while tidying the upstairs rooms, Mary noticed something that left her unsettled. The attic key, which was usually attached to Mr. Belmont's keyring, was hanging on a hook in the hallway. It was a rare moment of carelessness on his part. She knew she would have to act during the night when everyone was asleep. But the risk of being caught was enormous, and any misstep could be costly. Still, she couldn't ignore the chance. "I need to know more. It's the only way to protect Clara," she thought. Holding the key in her hands, she felt her determination grow. That night promised answers, or new threats. The Belmont mansion was enveloped in the silence of the early hours. Only the occasional sound of rain, which had returned, and the ticking of the large hall clock filled the void. Mary, gripping the lantern in one hand and the attic key in the other, felt her heart pounding almost as loudly as the clock's ticking. After waiting patiently for her employers to fall asleep, she ascended the stairs as quietly as possible. Reaching the attic door, adrenaline coursed through her veins. The key felt heavier than it should, as though the weight of Clara's fate, and her own, was contained in that small piece of metal. With trembling hands, Mary inserted the key into the lock and turned it slowly. The click of the lock disengaging sounded far too loud. She froze, holding her breath, but no movement came from the surrounding rooms. Opening the door, she climbed the stairs with the lantern ahead, illuminating the shadowy space. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of old wood and dust. She approached the corner where she had first found Clara, but the girl wasn't there. "Clara," she called in a whisper. A noise from behind a stack of boxes made her turn quickly. Clara emerged from behind the objects, her wide eyes and pale face betraying her fear. "You came back," the girl said, her voice low and trembling. "I thought I'd never see you again." Mary knelt before her, gently holding Clara's hands. "I promised I'd come back, didn't I? Now I need you to tell me the truth, dear. Everything. We can't get out of here without it." Clara hesitated, glancing toward the attic door as if she feared someone might be listening. "They'll catch us if they know you're here." Mary shook her head. "I won't let that happen, but I need to know what else they're hiding. Why are they so afraid of you leaving this place?" Clara took a deep breath and began to speak. "My mother died because she found out things about my father, things he did to other people. She wanted to go to the police, but he didn't let her. After she died, they said I was a disgrace. That if anyone found out about me, it could ruin everything they have." Mary felt her stomach churn. She had already suspected the Belmonts were capable of cruelty, but what Clara described was far worse than she imagined. Before she could ask more, a noise from downstairs made them both freeze. Footsteps. Someone was coming up the stairs. Mary quickly extinguished the lantern and pulled Clara into a dark corner, hiding behind a stack of covered furniture. She held the girl close, trying to stifle both their breathing. The attic door creaked open slowly. A silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs. It was Mr. Belmont. He entered with a flashlight in hand, sweeping its beam across the room with a calculated look. "If you're here, it's better to come out now," he said, his voice low and menacing. Mary felt Clara grip her hand tightly, trembling with fear. Belmont took a few more steps into the attic, his flashlight beam passing just inches from Mary's face. She stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. After a few tense moments, he seemed to give up and left, slamming the door behind him with a force that made Clara let out a small sob. Mary knew time was running out. They had to leave, and fast. She waited several minutes after Belmont's footsteps faded down the corridor. The silence was even more oppressive than the sound of his steps. When she finally felt it was safe, she loosened her hold on Clara and whispered, "We need to get out of here, and it has to be tonight. Can you trust me?" Clara nodded, though fear was etched on her face. "They'll find us. They always find me." Mary cupped the girl's face gently. "Not this time. I'll protect you, Clara. I promise." Mary knew escaping the mansion would be almost impossible. The main doors were always locked, and the Belmonts would certainly be on high alert after Mr. Belmont's visit to the attic. She needed a plan that wouldn't raise suspicion until the last moment. "Is there another way out? Somewhere they don't monitor?" Mary asked as Clara thought hard, biting her lip. "The basement. There's a window that leads to the garden, but it's rusted shut. I don't think anyone's touched it in years," Clara said. Mary nodded. "That'll work. Stay quiet and wait until I come for you. We'll only leave when everything's ready." Back in the kitchen, Mary began putting her plan into action. She knew she'd need to distract the Belmonts while clearing the path for their escape. She prepared a soup for the couple, mixing in a mild sedative she always kept in her bag. It wasn't dangerous, but would make them drowsy enough for her to act unnoticed. When the soup was ready, she served each of them a bowl and brought it to the sitting room, where they were reading and discussing matters Mary couldn't care less about. "Your dinner, Mr. and Mrs. Belmont," she said, maintaining her polite tone. "Ah, thank you, Mary," Mrs. Belmont replied without even glancing at her. While they ate, Mary returned to the kitchen, where she prepared tools to pry open the basement window, a sharp knife and a thick cloth to protect her hands. Once ready, she went back to the attic and found Clara waiting in the corner. "Everything's set. We're going to the basement," Mary said, helping the girl down the stairs as quietly as possible. The path to the basement was tense. Every creak of the floorboards made Mary stop and glance around, fearing the Belmonts might appear. Finally, they reached the basement, a dark, damp space filled with old boxes and unused furniture. Mary found the rusted window Clara had mentioned. It was covered in cobwebs and hadn't been opened in decades. With determination, Mary began prying it open with a knife while Clara held the lantern, watching anxiously. "It's going to work, dear. Just a little more," Mary said, sweat dripping down her forehead. Finally, the window gave way with a loud creak. The rain outside splashed onto their faces, but Mary felt a wave of relief. "All right, let's get out of here," she said, helping Clara through the narrow opening. But before she could climb out, hurried footsteps echoed in the basement. "I knew it!" Mr. Belmont's booming voice rang out. He appeared in the doorway, his eyes burning with fury. Mary stood protectively in front of Clara, raising the knife as a last resort. "Don't you dare touch her!" she shouted, her voice brimming with determination. Mr. Belmont took a step forward, but before he could act, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Mary had called Sister Margareth before putting her plan into motion, pleading for help. The police had finally arrived. Belmont glanced at Mary and then at the open window. He knew it was over. The sirens grew louder, their wails cutting through the night like a beacon of hope. Mary kept the knife steady in her hand, her gaze locked on Belmont. He appeared torn between attacking and fleeing, but the roar of police vehicles pulling up to the mansion made him hesitate. "You have no idea what you've done, Mary," Belmont growled, his eyes narrowed with rage. "I did what any decent person would do. Your charade is over, and Clara is leaving this house, whether you like it or not, Mary replied, her voice filled with a determination that surprised even herself. Belmont advanced another step, but before he could make a move, firm footsteps echoed in the hallway. 2 police officers entered the basement with weapons drawn, followed by Sister Margareth. "Stop right there, Mr. Belmont," one officer commanded. Belmont froze, his eyes darting between the officers and Mary. Clara, still hiding behind Mary, clung to her hand, her face pale with fear. "This woman is lying. She's just a housekeeper," Belmont said, attempting to maintain his composure. "This is an invasion of property. We received an anonymous tip and enough reports to warrant an investigation," the officer replied, ignoring Belmont's words. "And based on what we've seen so far, it appears we've uncovered more than we expected." Sister Margareth stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Belmont. "Mr. Belmont, your silence may have protected your reputation for years, but the truth will now come out. Clara is an innocent child, and what you've done to her is unacceptable." Belmont stepped back, but didn't respond. At that moment, Mrs. Belmont appeared in the basement doorway, seemingly in shock at the sight of the police. "What's going on here?" she yelled, but her voice was drowned out as the officer explained that the house was now officially under investigation. As the Belmonts were taken for questioning, Mary and Clara were escorted to safety at Sister Margaretha's church. The girl, initially frightened, began to relax as she realized she was outside the mansion for the first time in years. "You're safe now, dear," Mary said, holding Clara's hand tightly. "And you're safe too," Sister Margareth added, placing a reassuring hand on Mary's shoulder. "What you did was brave but also risky. Not everyone would have had the strength to confront such a powerful family." Mary smiled faintly, though her heart remained heavy. She knew Clara's path to recovery wouldn't be easy, but she was relieved to have freed the girl from her nightmare. In the days following the investigation, it was revealed that Mr. Belmont had been involved in numerous illegal schemes, in addition to keeping Clara a secret. The evidence Mary had gathered in his office helped the police connect the dots, and the Belmont family's reputation crumbled within days. Clara was officially taken in by a care organization, but Mary requested to continue looking after her. When the legal documents were finalized, Mary became Clara's legal guardian, giving her the family she had never had. "I promised I'd get you out of there, and now I promise to give you a real life," Mary said as they walked together in the church square. Clara smiled for the first time in years, holding the hand of the woman who had risked everything to save her. Mary's courage changed 2 lives forever, hers and Clara's. What began as an ordinary job transformed into an act of heroism, proving that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge from the most unexpected places. In the end, the Belmonts were sentenced to 30 years in a maximum security prison, and Mary and Clara were finally able to live peacefully under the protection of the police and the church.